The sun had gone from gold to rust when the wagon tilted and didn't rise again. The wheel snapped first, then the axle moaned, then silence, but for the wind. Leora May Whitlock sat beside her mother's body, cradling a head that had already grown too heavy with death. Flies circled lazily. The prairie stretched around them in every direction, a vast cathedral of nothingness. There was no choir, no prayer, only the dust rising from the backs of wagons already too far ahead to turn back. Her mother's last breath had sounded like fabric tearing. The others hadn't meant cruelty. Not directly. They'd murmured about bad luck, about illness being contagious. One man dropped a flask of water by her feet before riding on. Another had said, "She's of age. She'll manage." And so they left her, a girl of 25 who had never lit a fire without guidance, whose fingers still trembled after skinning rabbits, whose mother had been the only anchor in a life always shifting like the trail. She'd stopped counting the hours. Her skirts were soaked through with blood and creek mud. Her lips cracked so deep she tasted iron. There was no weeping. The grief sat too large in her throat, pressing like a rock that refused to move. She was still there when the horse arrived. Not the man. The horse came first. A paint, tall and steady, its mane braided in an old way. It stepped with the care of something long-schooled in listening before acting. The rider dismounted without a word. He was tall, lean with broad shoulders, and the gait of someone used to silence. His hair was black, braided down his back. His skin sun-burnished, his eyes storm-colored. Apache, she thought faintly, though her mind no longer trusted conclusions. He stood there a long while, watching her, watching the body. Then, slowly, he unslung a waterskin and knelt, holding it out in both hands. She took it without thanks, too dry for manners, and drank in greedy gulps that made her chest burn. Still, he said nothing. When she lowered the flask, the man removed his coat, a worn buckskin with threadbare cuffs, and draped it over her mother's body. Leora let out a shudder that might have been a breath or a sob. Her hands reached toward the coat, but fell away. The gesture felt too big, too final. He didn't bury the woman, nor suggest doing so. Instead, he looked up at the bleeding light in the sky, dusk, angry with fire, and turned toward the horizon where the road led. She followed. Her legs moved without instruction. The prairie pressed close, whispering in languages she didn't speak. She walked until her calves screamed, until her breath whistled between cracked teeth. He never spoke, never slowed, but he looked back twice. That was enough. After a while, he reached down and helped her onto the paint's back. She didn't resist. They reached town beneath stars. Sunawee was barely more than a stretch of dirt pinned with lanterns. One main street, two crooked saloons, and the church bell that hadn't rung in months. Horses snorted in dark stables. Windows glowed behind lace. And eyes, always eyes, peered from behind shutters. They passed Miss Clarabelle first. She stood on her porch, long gray braid swinging down one shoulder, hands sunk in a basin of lavender water. Her nose wrinkled. "Took in a trail stray, have you?" she called, voice syruped with disdain. "Ain't your business, Chaska." The Apache man, now named by her, said nothing, didn't glance up. Clarabelle kept muttering. "Girl's got nothing. Barely skin on her bones. She won't last long." Leora stared straight ahead, spine tight with shame. The words clung like burrs. They came to a stable on the edge of town. Chaska dismounted, lifted her down with rough care, then handed her the reins. "You walk," he said, voice gravel-soft. She blinked. He pointed. "The horse. You walk her. Keep her warm." It wasn't a kindness. It was a command. Something to keep her upright, breathing, moving. And she obeyed. He lit a lantern in the stable and brought out feed, brushing the mare's flanks with rhythm that steadied the silence between them. She fed the animal slowly, fingers brushing muzzle, straw, cracked wood. Every now and then she glanced up, expecting him to vanish, a ghost called by pity. But he stayed. When she finally sank onto the hay in the corner, her limbs trembling from more than exhaustion, he laid a folded blanket at her side and left. Just like that. No words, no warning. She heard the door shut behind him. The silence returned. Sleep didn't come easily. Grief had corners, and they all pressed against her at once. She clutched her mother's shawl to her chest, the blue cotton now blood-dark in patches. She pressed her nose into it, inhaled the ghost of rosewater, and tried to breathe without remembering. In the early light, she woke cold and startled to the smell of something warm, not food, but cedar smoke and saddle leather. Chaska stood just inside the door, a tin cup in his hand. He offered it without stepping forward. "Drink," he said. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. It felt like touching stone warmed by sun. Her pulse caught, but he was already looking away, adjusting the latch on a bridle. She drank. That morning, gossip spread faster than prairie fire. "He's keeping her in his barn. They say she ain't right in the head. She don't talk, just stares. She's Mexican enough. Maybe you don't mind." Miss Clarabelle made it a full verse, telling it to the pastor, to the sheriff's wife, to the laundress with the missing eye. He didn't even ask the reverend, just brought her in like a stray dog with ribs showing. Sheriff Deke Rollins squinted at the horizon and said, "He always was strange. Fought with them boys in the war, you know." The town didn't say much to Chaska's face. He had a way of being present that discouraged interference. But they watched. Leora could feel their watching even from behind barn slats. Every step she took outside felt like dragging a chain of invisible judgment. Still she stayed. Chaska never touched her, never asked questions. He left bread on the stoop in the morning, oats and firewood in the shed, and each evening he brushed the horse while she fetched water. Their words were few, their gestures simple, but something strange took root in the stillness between them. One afternoon, she tried to speak. "My name is—" He stopped her with a glance. Not unkind, but final. "Names come later," he said, and she understood. On the third night, she found the coat, his, folded beside her saddle roll, the one that had covered her mother. She held it for a long time before laying it across her shoulders, heavy as grief, warm as something dangerously close to mercy. She didn't cry. Not yet. But that night, she dreamed of sunflowers growing from the bones of her mother's grave, tall and golden and turning their faces toward light. And when she woke, she was still holding the coat. The house stood at the edge of the world, or so it felt to Leora. Beyond its fence lay nothing but the low hum of wind across canyon stone, a hush so profound it swallowed even thought. The building itself was humble, one room, one stove, walls weathered to gray, as though the seasons had rubbed off its color. No flowers out front, no rocking chair on the porch, just the echo of silence pressed into every board. Inside, it smelled of leather, tobacco, and cedar smoke. She crossed the threshold like a trespasser, arms still cradling her own elbows. There was no invitation, only a nod from Chaska as he gestured to a stool near the stove. She sat. He set a kettle on to boil without a word. He moved like a man whose body remembered everything, even when his mouth refused to speak it. His hands bore scars, not the pink whispers of accidents, but deep, ridged memories carved into skin. One was fresh, a burn blistering along the base of his thumb. She wondered if it came from her, from that firelight night, but didn't ask. She hadn't spoken since. There was a bed in the corner, tightly made, a table, 2 chairs, a rusted mirror cracked down its middle. No family photos, no trinkets, only a horseshoe nailed above the door and a bundle of dried herbs that swung gently whenever the wind sneaked through the chinks. That first night, she didn't sleep inside. He pointed her to the barn with a rolled blanket and a firm glance. It wasn't unkind, just a boundary, one she respected. The barn, at least, had a rhythm, the creak of rafters, the slow breath of the horses. One mare with a white blaze nuzzled her cheek when she sat down, as if recognizing sorrow. Leora sank into the hay and stared upward until the shadows braided themselves into sleep. In the morning, a basin of water waited outside the barn door. Next to it, a bar of lye soap and a comb. She hadn't combed her hair since before the trail broke her mother. Her fingers trembled, but she set to work. Straw fell from her curls. The knots protested. Her scalp burned, but she did it. That afternoon, he led her to the corral. He handed her a brush and nodded toward a red roan gelding. "Try not to spook him," he said. His voice was soft-spoken, gravel-worn, with the kind of patience that didn't expect an answer. She moved slowly, like approaching a prayer. The roan flicked its ears, eyed her, but allowed the brush. Stroke by stroke, her shoulders loosened. Behind her, Chaska fixed a halter, then moved on to the next stall. He didn't hover, didn't instruct, just let her learn by feel. The animals trusted him. They didn't flinch when he passed. His hand on their flanks was as steady as stone, and quieter than thought. By the third day, she spoke. "He's missing a shoe." Chaska didn't look up from his saddle strap. "I know." "Why?" "Making him wait." "For what?" "To need me." She blinked. It wasn't arrogance, just truth, spoken plainly, the way the wind told the trees it would come, whether they bent or broke. Later, when she tried to help mend a girth strap, her stitches slipped. He took the leather from her and showed her again, slow, deliberate, with his hands brushing hers only long enough to steady the thread. She felt the contact like fire, but said nothing. That evening, in town, the stares deepened. They walked down Sunaway's main road, silent as ever. She carried a small sack of flour. He carried nails. Miss Clarabelle stood in her porch swing, rocking slowly, sipping something sharp. "There they go," she whispered loudly. "A barn girl and a half-man." Pastor Elam, passing by with his head low, gave them both a nod, but he said nothing. The sheriff, leaning against the saloon rail, called out, "You keeping her on your land, Red Elk? That's some tribal thing we're meant to look away from." Chaska said nothing, just looked once, long and hard, until even the whiskey in the sheriff's glass seemed to grow uneasy. Leora said nothing either, but the shame curled in her belly like smoke. That night, she scrubbed the porch with her bare hands until her knuckles bled. In the quiet, kindness began to grow. Chaska left a wool shawl folded by her door. She found wildflowers in an empty can beside her sleeping mat. When the rains came and the roof leaked over her corner, he fixed it before dawn. Not a word exchanged, just the creak of boards and the scent of fresh-cut pine. One night, she found a book beside her bowl of stew. Worn cover, missing half its pages. Inside, the faded script of a woman's hand, poems in Spanish. Her mother had spoken Spanish in whispers, mostly in lullabies. Leora turned the pages with reverence, as if afraid her fingertips might erase the words. She didn't ask if it had been his wife's. She already knew. The days turned slow and golden. Dust drifted like ash in the evening sun. Horses moved like living prayer through the paddock. The rhythm settled her. She learned to grind corn, to stitch without blood, to listen for the moods in the wind. But the town didn't forget. Children pointed. One boy threw a stone. It struck her ankle. She didn't cry out, didn't look back. But that night, Chaska brought out an old tin filled with salve and gently dabbed her bruised skin with a cloth. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "I know," she answered. The silence afterward felt like thunder held in the throat. She thought of leaving, thought of walking east until her feet bled, until she found a new place where no one knew her mother's name, her father's sin, or what trail she'd been abandoned on. But something stopped her. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't safety. It was the quiet way the horses waited for her at dusk, the way the sky burned copper over the canyon, as if it, too, had survived something unspoken, and the way Chaska moved through space, not around her, but with her, as if she were not in his way, but part of his path. One morning, she caught him humming, just a few notes, low and rough, like something remembered more by the body than the mind. It broke her. She stepped behind the stable, hands clutched to her chest, and wept for the first time since her mother died. Not the silent leaking of tears, but sobs, wild, raw, and full. She pressed her face to the fence post and cried until her breath hitched. When she turned, he was there. He didn't ask why, didn't offer comfort, just stood beside her, hands at his sides, eyes steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For breaking." He shook his head. "You didn't break. You bled." It was the first thing he'd said that sounded like grace. She looked at him then, really looked, saw the lines at the corners of his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders, the quiet ache in his silences. They were not so different. By the end of the week, she slept indoors, on a cot near the stove. He'd moved the table to make room, said nothing, just left a folded quilt on the bed frame. She lay under it, listening to the wind claw the shutters. The house still didn't laugh, but it no longer felt empty. It felt waiting, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself hope that something, or someone, might be waiting for her too. The gossip ran faster than the river after a spring thaw. It trickled through sewing circles, sloshed in whiskey mugs, danced in saloon corners, and hung like smoke in the rafters of the church. Sunawee had no need for newspapers, just ears and tongues sharpened by years of sun and suspicion. "She's not sleeping in that barn anymore," whispered Miss Clarabelle, shelling peas beneath her porch crossbeam. "Moved into his house. On a cot, my eye." "She don't speak much, but he listens," murmured old Josie from behind the laundry line. "He's claiming her, silent-like," said the blacksmith, hammer paused mid-swing. "Mark me, that Apache's building himself a wife." Even Pastor Elam, kind and soft-spoken, approached her one morning on the walk from the well. His fingers clutched a worn Bible like a shield. "Miss Whitlock," he began gently, eyes searching her face as if it held a prayer half-written. "If you'd prefer, there's room at the church house for women fallen on hard times." She looked at him for a long while, then said, "I ain't fallen." His mouth worked around a reply he couldn't find, and finally he just tipped his hat and walked on, dust rising behind him. The weight of being watched never left her shoulders. It hung like a soaked shawl, pressing into her bones with every step. Leora kept her head down at the mercantile, didn't linger by the flour, learned to listen to conversations not meant for her. But even weight can become familiar. It was something else entirely that rattled her one bright afternoon. She had just finished brushing the gelding, now fully shod and spirited again, when the reek of smoke twisted sharp into her nostrils. It was acrid, bitter wrong. Not hearth smoke, but burning cloth and dry wood. Then she heard it, the frightened whinny from the barn. She dropped the curry comb and ran. The fire was at the corner wall, already climbing like a desperate thing. Someone had tossed in an oil-soaked rag, set alight. The hay caught fast, bright orange tongues licking toward the loft. The horses kicked and screamed, their panic echoing across the property like gunfire. Chaska wasn't there. Leora didn't pause to think. She yanked the barn doors wide, coughing as smoke clawed her throat. The roan reared, eyes wild, but she grabbed his halter with trembling hands and led him out into the yard. The others followed, snorting, stomping, terrified. She turned back for the last one, a skittish palomino in the far stall, when a sudden crack above made her flinch. A burning rafter dropped behind her, searing the ground where she'd just stepped. Strong arms gripped her waist. Chaska hauled her backward just as the roof groaned. They stumbled into the dirt together, rolling. She was coughing, crying, gasping. He pulled her to her knees, checked her hands, her face. His own was streaked with soot, one side of his hair singed at the edge. "You went back in," he said hoarsely. "Of course I did." Their eyes met through the smoke. The barn couldn't be saved. The corner wall collapsed in a furious hiss of steam as the fire reached the trough. Chaska stood, shoulders heaving, watching it burn. She stood beside him, smoke weaving into her skirts, eyes watering not just from heat. Sheriff Rollins arrived late, as usual, spurs jingling, a hand lazily resting on his hip. He saw the scorched wood, the blistering earth, the trembling girl beside the Apache. "No one saw who did it," he said, too quickly. "Shame." Leora said nothing. Chaska said less. But the town heard, and the whispers took a darker turn. "They meant to scare her," someone said. "They meant to drive him out," someone else added. "She'll be next," Clarabelle hissed, but quieter this time. That evening, Leora brought out the old salve tin and tended Chaska's hand, which had blistered anew from breaking down the burning beam. He sat still as stone, watching her fingers dab carefully at the angry red. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but didn't flinch. She didn't wear gloves. Her touch was steady. "My wife used to hum," he said suddenly. When she did this. Leora paused, eyes lifting. Would you like me to? He blinked. Then slowly, shook his head. No, that was hers. She nodded. The silence between them didn't stretch, it settled. When the pain dulled, he motioned toward the yard. Come, he said. It was dusk. The sky stretched pale violet overhead, dotted with stars not yet bright enough to name. He brought out one of the younger Mares and handed her a brush. She's vain, he said. Braid her mane. She likes it. Leora laughed. Just a breathy exhale at first, but it grew, soft, almost embarrassed. I don't know how to braid. Chaska crouched beside her, took a section of coarse black mane in his calloused fingers, demonstrated once, then nodded. She tried, failed, tried again, made a knotted mess that even the mare looked offended by. That's when he laughed. It was short and low, like someone remembering how. Not cruel, not mocking, just surprised. A sound pulled from a place long closed. She turned toward him, startled, and smiled fully now, teeth and all. Don't ask me to sew, she warned, unless you like your shirts with 3 sleeves. He grinned, and the lines on his face shifted, softened. For a moment, he looked younger than 30. For a moment, he looked like something new. They stayed outside long after the stars had settled properly into the sky. She sat cross-legged in the grass, weaving what she could manage of a mane. He lit his pipe, the scent of sweet leaf curling around them. Neither spoke much. Words were unnecessary when the silence between them was so full. Inside the house that night, she found something laid on her cot. Her mother's blue shawl, freshly washed, folded, and sewn at the edges where it had torn. Not perfectly, but with care. Beside it, a tin button. Burnished, mismatched, useless. She picked it up, turned it over in her palm, and smiled. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a promise. But it was a gesture, quiet, unexpected, and stitched with meaning. She tucked the button into the fold of the shawl and curled beneath the quilt, the scent of horse and fire still clinging to her skin. Outside, the wind shifted. The burned barn would be ash by morning. The town would keep whispering. But inside that silent house, something had begun to change. And for the first time in a long, long while, Leora slept without fear. The rain came slow at first, soft as breath against the tin roof, a lullaby of distant clouds and cooled earth. Then it deepened, a full song of sky-born sorrow, each drop a steady hand tapping on the old boards above Leora's cot. She lay still beneath her quilt, listening, eyes open in the dark, tracing the pattern of water running down the window pane. It had been weeks since the fire. The barn was now just a square of churned earth and blackened boards. Chaska hadn't rebuilt it yet. When she asked why, he said only, "Let the ground rest." So the horses slept under lean-tos, and the wind moved through open spaces like it was remembering something it had once tried to forget. That night, the rain seemed heavier than the roof could hold. Thunder rolled from far off, a deep, patient growl, and Leora rose barefoot to stir the fire. She wrapped herself in her mother's blue shawl, now stitched and mended, and padded quietly across the creaking floor. Chaska was sitting at the table already, as though the storm had summoned them both without a word. He looked up, nodded once. She poured water into the kettle and stoked the coals. Silence wrapped around them like a quilt worn soft from use, comfortable now, not cold. The flames danced in the stove, painting orange onto his face. He looked tired, not in the way of men who work, but in the way of men who carry. She'd begun to learn the difference. "Does rain always sound like this out here?" she asked. He nodded. "When it means to." She sat across from him, folding her hands over her knees. "Back in Kansas, we had storms that would shake the house, but they didn't sound like this. There was more wind, more anger." He looked at her for a long beat. The land here forgives slower. The kettle began to murmur, and she reached to pour them each a tin cup of warm water with sage steeped in it. No sugar, no honey, just earth and leaf. "Were you ever in love?" she asked, the question falling out like a pebble tossed into deep water. Chaska didn't flinch. He sipped, then set his cup down with care. "Still am." She hadn't expected that. Her breath caught. He met her gaze with something neither sharp nor soft, only true. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just goes quiet. Leora stared at the flicker of firelight in her cup. Is there enough room for a new one to speak? His brow furrowed, like he'd been caught off guard, but he didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the folds of his coat and drew out a thin bundle, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with leather cord. He set it gently on the table between them. She looked to him for permission, and he gave a single nod. Unwrapping it, her fingers brushed the edge of a tiny beadwork band. Blue, white, and yellow, shaped like sunrise and shadow. A woman's necklace, she thought, delicate and full of meaning. Next to it, a child's booty, so small it could rest in her palm. She looked up, eyes wide. She died in birthing, he said, voice lower now, like he was afraid to scare the ghosts. Both of them. My wife, my son. She wanted to reach for his hand, but didn't. Something told her not yet. Instead, she whispered, I'm sorry. He nodded again. I buried her under the cottonwood east of the canyon. Marked the spot with a stone she liked, one with a red vein running through it. The rain surged louder. The roof groaned. She set the bundle back, rewrapping it with slow hands, as if returning something holy. I thought if I stayed beside her, she wouldn't leave, she said, her voice barely audible. When my mama was dying, she told me to run. She was afraid the sickness would take me too. But I couldn't. I just knelt there like a fool, held her hand and lied that she'd be fine. She died thinking I wouldn't listen, that I'd rather die with her than live alone. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was vast. When Chaska finally spoke, it was barely above the crackle of the fire. She knew. How could she? Because she was a mother. The room seemed to breathe. Later, after the rain had softened and the fire had dulled to a lazy glow, he brought out a wooden comb and gestured toward her with it. She blinked, unsure. For church, he said, if you mean to go. She sat on the floor in front of him, heart thudding in places it hadn't thudded in years. He combed her hair slowly, gently, untangling knots with care. His fingers brushed her neck, her temple. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cedar of his shirt, the smoke on his skin. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But something passed between them. Not heat, not want, but trust. The next morning, she walked into town with her hair braided and pinned. The church bell tolled once. Then again. The door creaked open, and the murmurs began. She sat near the back, alone. Some turned to look. A few didn't bother hiding their stares. After the sermon, Miss Clarabelle approached, wearing her Sunday best and a look tight as string. Well, she said, drawing out the word like it tasted sour. Didn't expect to see you here. Suppose next you'll be standing up with that Apache man and calling it a wedding. Leora smiled, soft and calm. Maybe, she said. Clarabelle's mouth twitched. Don't think you'll be accepted. I don't expect to be. Then she turned and walked down the steps with her shoulders straight. Chaska was waiting with the horses. He offered her the reins without a word, but she saw it. The slight shift of his jaw, the glint in his eyes, something like pride tucked behind the quiet. Halfway home, he reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small length of woven thread, red, black, and white. This isn't a ring, he said. It's for binding. My people use it when they don't need paper to know what matters. He handed it to her. Not a proposal, not a demand, just a choice. She held it for a moment, fingers tightening around the band, then slipped it into the pocket of her shawl. That night, sleep didn't come. She lay under her quilt, hand tucked around the thread, heart pounding with a strange mix of longing and terror. Love, she realized, wasn't a thunderclap. It was a door left ajar, waiting for you to step through without being told. Outside, the moon climbed above the canyon, silvering the sky like forgiveness. And inside the little house with no laughter, something bloomed in the silence. A question still unanswered, a promise not yet made, but present all the same. Sunday dawned in gold, the kind of gold that made the land look forgiving, as though it had forgotten the hurt it once held. Leora rose before the bell rang, her shawl folded neatly across the end of the cot. the woven band still tucked in its pocket, like a secret too soft to speak aloud. She braided her hair slowly, as Chaska had done once, then again herself. She wore the same patched dress from her mother's funeral trail, only now washed, mended, and carried not as grief, but as memory made whole. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was faint and fractured, but her spine was straight. Outside, Chaska waited by the mare, his hat pulled low. He didn't speak as she mounted. She didn't need him to. They rode side by side toward Sunowi, the town still stretching its limbs beneath the rising sun. Smoke curled from chimneys, shutters creaked open, and Clarabelle's laundry already hung damp on the line. There was always some watching eye here, eyes that judged what they didn't understand, feared what they couldn't own. As they tied their horses near the church steps, silence folded around them like a drawn breath. Pastor Elam stood near the door. He gave a brief nod, half sorrow, half warning, then stepped aside. Inside, the pews filled slowly. The townsfolk shifted like birds disturbed from their roosts. Mothers pulled children closer. Men stared too long. No one spoke aloud, but the whispers swelled beneath the wooden beams like rising flood water. They're here together, living under the same roof. She's thrown her name in the dust. It didn't matter. She sat. Her hands didn't shake this time. Chaska remained outside. When service ended, the crowd spilled into the sun like ants disturbed. Leora moved toward the steps, head high. Chaska stood at the corner, arms crossed, watching the flow of people, the way wolves watch the edge of a campfire. That's when it began. Sheriff Deke Rollins stepped forward, the brim of his hat tipped back, just enough to show the grease in his hair. He had a bottle's weight in his walk, and the smirk of a man who'd been waiting for this moment. "You hear the latest law out of Santa Fe?" he asked, loud enough for the whole square to hear. "Says if a man's shacking up with a woman not his wife, he's to be fined, or removed." Chaska didn't move. His gaze locked on the sheriff's like iron. "Now, I'm no judge," Rollins continued, "but the town's tired of looking at what ain't right. Girl's still got settler blood. She don't belong with you. And you," he pointed now, sharp and slow, "you don't belong here at all." The word belong hung like smoke, bitter in the morning air. "You want her." Rollins sneered. "Make it official, or get out." Leora stepped down then, boots steady on the church wood. "Is that law written on paper?" she asked quietly. Rollins squinted. "Does it matter?" "To you, maybe not," she said. "To me, it's the difference between a threat and the truth." "She's got a mouth now," someone muttered. The crowd chuckled. Rollins turned to her. "You're young. You could still save yourself. You don't need to be ruined for a man like this." And then the bottle flew. It came from someone behind the crowd, arcing toward Chaska with a sound like betrayal made solid. It shattered on the ground at his feet. Then another voice, half drunk, half furious, shouted, "Run him out. Send the girl back to decent folks." A shot rang out. It was sharp, sudden, and it echoed through the square like a thunderclap. A second of frozen silence followed. Chaska had dropped to one knee. His shoulder bled, just a graze, but vivid, blooming red across the seam of his shirt. Leora ran to him. He stood before she reached him, rising like stone against storm. His hand went to his knife, but he did not draw. Rollins backed a step. "Easy," he barked. "Don't make this worse." Leora stepped between them. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "He's the only man who's ever left me fed, clothed and whole," she said. "He never touched me without permission, never raised his voice, never once asked for more than I could give. He taught me how to mend leather, how to listen to horses, how to sleep without fear. If that ruins me, then I was never worth saving to you in the first place." Her words split the air. Behind her, someone shifted. Pastor Elam stepped forward, clearing his throat. "You forget your place, Sheriff. We don't shoot men for giving shelter. Not in the Lord's house." "She's bound herself to him," Rollins hissed, "in front of God and everyone." Chaska looked at Leora then. She looked back. She reached into her shawl and drew out the woven band. Her fingers trembled only once. Then she took his hand and wrapped the thread around both their palms. I don't need a ring, she said. I don't need papers. This is my yes. The silence that followed was heavier than a gallows rope. Chaska didn't speak. He only nodded once, his eyes soft in the sun, as if something inside him had come to rest. Behind them, someone clapped. Then another. A smattering of hands, uncertain but honest. Rollin swore under his breath and turned away. They left the town not as fugitives, but as something else entirely. At the edge of the road, where the canyon opened wide and the wind carried Lupin across the stone, they stopped. The mare snorted. The land ahead was wild and blooming. He turned to her. You sure? She smiled. I've never been surer of anything in my life. They rode until the town vanished behind them, until the whispers faded into wind, until the sky stretched without boundary and every breath felt earned. At sunset, they reached the cottonwood. The grave sat beneath it still. Chaska dismounted and placed a stone beside the old marker. Leora added a flower. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They made their home where the land was wide and the nights held only stars. And the house, in time, learned to laugh again, because some love stories aren't built in fire and thunder. Some are built in quiet hands, in stitched shawls and unspoken grace, in mornings that come after sorrow, and the softest yes offered beneath the eyes of the whole world. If you ever feel unworthy of love, remember her. She was told she was nothing, and still, she chose a life that felt true, and it bloomed.